He had spent so many nights staring at concrete ceilings and shelter rafters that the idea of having a roof that belonged to him felt like a story someone else had lived, not him. It felt like a rumor drifting through the life of another man entirely, not the one who now carried every scrap of his existence in a worn-out backpack and walked beside a stray dog who had chosen him on a freezing morning behind a grocery store dumpster. So when the lawyer pushed the envelope across a flimsy plastic desk and said, "It's a house on the cliffs," his first reaction wasn't disbelief or hope or even joy. It was fear, sharp, unreasonable, the kind that coils in the chest like an old warning, as if the past had finally found a new path to drag him back into a story he thought he had escaped. The key inside the envelope was small, cold, smoothed by years of handling, tied to a fading tag with his grandfather's name scribbled across it in ink blurred at the edges. The map tucked beside it was roughly sketched, more memory than calligraphy, jagged coastlines, dark marks for cliffs, and a small block where the house sat almost like an afterthought perched at the edge of the world. No explanation came with it, no apology, no tender note, just a formal letter confirming what the lawyer had already said. His grandfather, the same man who had driven his father away decades ago, had left the house solely to him. Not the cousins who never returned his calls, not the uncle who changed numbers every year. A man who slept under bridges and whispered tired prayers into the rumble of passing trucks now owned a house clinging to rock and sky. Nothing in his life had ever made less sense. He left the city as the sky bruised into purples and old gold, the bus rattling along narrow roads perched above an ocean that looked restless enough to swallow the land whole. Wind-twisted trees bent toward the waves like they were bowing in surrender. His dog, a scruffy brown and black mutt with one ear that never stayed straight, curled against his boot, eyes steady, tracking every sway of the bus with quiet loyalty. He stroked the soft spot behind the dog's ear. "Almost there, buddy," he whispered, steadying himself more than the dog. The other passengers barely acknowledged him. Just a man in worn jeans and a faded jacket, boots scuffed white at the toes, someone the world had learned to see past. Outside the window, cliffs dropped sharply into grey-blue water that clawed at the rocks as though trying to drag them under. Spray lifted like mist above the road. Somewhere among those cliffs, tucked into stone and memory, was a house holding the last name he had never fully released, even when everything else had been stripped from him. The bus let him off at a lonely turn where the road curved inland. The driver nodded toward a thin dirt track leading toward the cliffs. "That's yours," he said, as if the whole town already knew a ghost had returned carrying a frayed backpack, an uncertain future, and an inheritance that didn't match the wear in his clothes. When the bus rumbled away, he stood in the wind alone, adjusting his backpack before heading down the narrow path. Gravel crunched beneath his boots. His dog walked just ahead, tail low but wagging, quiet assurance that they would face whatever waited together. The path sliced through gnarled shrubs and low grass that clung stubbornly to the ground. The air smelled of salt, damp earth, and distant storms. The cliff's edge appeared and vanished as he walked, offering dizzying flashes of churning waves far below. Every gust of wind shoved at him like a warning, urging caution. The sky hung heavy with undecided rain. Despite trying to stay in the present, his thoughts drifted backward, fragments of memory he'd rather bury. His grandfather's voice, not warm, yet not fully cruel, more like a blade sharpened by discipline. He remembered visiting the coast once as a child, before everything shattered, before his father stopped pretending they were welcome. A slamming door, the roar of waves, muffled shouting from the kitchen while he sat on the porch steps carving shapes in dirt with a stick. He hadn't expected to ever see the house again. He'd hoped he wouldn't. Yet here he was, following a hand-drawn map left behind by a man he barely understood, hoping the house held more shelter than ghosts, hoping it offered heat, a roof, a lock that functioned on purpose, not one that jammed from rust. "You ever seen the ocean, buddy?" he asked the dog just to hear something besides the wind and the pounding of his own heart. The dog glanced back, tongue lolling as if unimpressed by the ocean's theatrics. The path curved sharply upward, and suddenly the house emerged behind wind-bent trees, its silhouette stark against the grey sky. Smaller than he remembered, more fragile too. Weathered boards peeled along the sides, shingles mismatched across a sagging roofline. But the stone foundation looked stubborn, fusing the house to the cliff like it refused to be moved by time or storms. Two thin windows stared out at the ocean like tired eyes. A door with cracked paint and a rusted handle waited silently between them. He stood there, pulse thudding, listening to the ocean roar below. The house felt like it was waiting, as if aware of who he was or who he had become. His dog sniffed the porch, then looked back expectantly. "Yeah," he muttered. No turning back now. He stepped onto the porch, the boards moaning beneath his weight. The key in his pocket felt heavier than metal, pressing into his palm like a question he wasn't ready to answer. He slid it into the lock, half expecting it to resist, to prove this was all one long mistake. Instead, it turned smoothly with a soft click, as if the lock had been tended only yesterday. That unnerved him more than the idea of abandonment. Someone had cared for this place recently, someone who expected to return. He pushed the door open. The scent that drifted out wasn't mold or rot, but something gentler. Old wood, dust, salt, and a faint trace of coffee and soap. The front room was simple. A small table near a window, two mismatched chairs, a narrow couch with a neatly folded blanket. Shelves lined the wall filled with books, leaning on each other in weary companionship. A weathered coat and hat still hung by the door, like someone had just stepped out for air. Light seeped through the grimy windows, dust floating like slow-moving stars. His dog padded in, sniffing corners, then settled in front of the couch as if claiming the space. He closed the door behind him, the latch clicking softly, final but not threatening. For the first time in years, maybe longer, he stood inside a place that was his, not borrowed, not temporary. He stood in the center of the room, letting the idea of ownership settle like dust around him. A memory flickered. His father, drunk, raging, waving a bottle as he cursed this house like it was a monster that had ruined everything. "Let him keep that cliffside tomb," his father had snarled. "Let him rot in stone and silence. That's all he ever loved." Now here he was, standing in the middle of that same stone and silence, inheriting the place his father had refused to touch again. The bitterness in that thought stung, but beneath it simmered something else, relief maybe, or the faintest pull of possibility. He set his backpack aside and wandered through the room slowly, touching surfaces as if confirming they were real. The narrow kitchen held an old gas stove, a chipped sink, and a kettle waiting on the back burner. Down a short hallway, he found a bathroom and a small bedroom with a single bed neatly made. The closet door hung slightly open, revealing a few shirts and a pair of boots arranged carefully, his grandfather's habit of order clinging to the space. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, as if its owner had stepped out expecting to return. That thought lodged itself in his chest. Back in the living room, he noticed photographs he hadn't seen before. Black and white images with curling edges lined the wall above the shelf. His grandfather on the cliffs with a fishing rod, his grandmother laughing with her head thrown back, and a small boy perched on the porch steps outside, legs swinging in the wind. The boy was him. He moved closer, fingers brushing the air just shy of the frame, a quiet ache tightening in his throat. His dog whined softly behind him, sensing the shift. "It's okay," he murmured, even though he wasn't entirely sure it was. Below the photograph sat a small wooden box, plain and unmarked, placed with deliberate care. His pulse thudded. He lifted the lid. Inside were folded papers, a brass compass, and a photograph resting on top. In the photo, his grandfather stood beside a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a faded emblem on his jacket. Between them sat a wooden crate, stenciled with symbols he didn't recognize. Their expressions, part proud, part secretive, sent a chill down his spine. He unfolded the first paper. His grandfather's rigid handwriting filled the page, the words swimming before settling into focus. "If you're reading this, I have failed to say what mattered while breath still stayed in me." He sank into one of the chairs as the letter unfolded its weight. His grandfather wrote of building the house with his own father on solid rock, of storms that battered the walls, nights when the wind felt strong enough to rip the foundation apart. He confessed to pushing his son away when he should have bent, clinging to land and secrets like proof of existence. He wrote of regret, stubbornness, silence. And then the words shifted, becoming something far heavier. His grandfather described a hidden room beneath the house, carved into the stone, a place no one else knew existed. "This house is not just a home," the letter read. "It is a threshold. Your friend and I found something in the cliffs when we were young, something the town would have destroyed or stolen or ruined. We built around it, hid it, protected it. I swore to guard it, but I guarded it so tightly I lost the people I should have held close." The letter instructed him to find a disguised latch under the floorboards beneath the shelf. His heart hammered. His hands trembled. He knelt, feeling along the wood grain until his fingers brushed a raised knot that shifted under pressure. A soft click. A hidden handle. A section of floor lifted like a held breath finally released. He hesitated only a moment before pulling the hatch open. Cool, stale air rose from the dark below, carrying the scent of stone and something older. He clicked on his flashlight, lowered himself onto a narrow staircase carved directly into the rock, and began descending. The dog followed, claws tapping nervously. The temperature dropped the farther they went. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a wide chamber. His flashlight swept across the walls and froze on something impossible. Smooth metal embedded into the cliff, geometric lines, riveted panels, markings in a script he didn't recognize. It was as if a piece of something larger, something engineered, not natural, had been swallowed by the earth. A worn workbench nearby held tools, notebooks, faded photographs of his grandfather, and the same tall stranger excavating the structure at various stages. In the oldest photo, only a hint of metal showed. In the last, an open hatch glowed faintly behind them as they sealed the entrance with boards. His grandfather's words echoed, "This place is a doorway." He felt suddenly small, standing between the world he'd lived and the one this room hinted at. Buddy nudged him gently, grounding him. He pressed his forehead briefly into the dog's fur. "We're in something big," he whispered. "Bigger than us." He approached the metal structure again, his light revealing a circular indentation the size of his palm. It looked like a lock waiting for a key. His mind immediately jumped to the compass upstairs. His heartbeat stuttered. He climbed back up, retrieved it, then descended once more. The metal hummed softly when he came near, as if sensing him. He pressed the compass into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a vibration shivered through the air. A thin ring of blue light circled his hand. The metal split down the center with a hiss, revealing a warm amber glow from within. Buddy barked, startled but curious. Inside was another room, small, carved smooth, lined with shelves filled with journals, sketches, mechanical prototypes, and metal cases neatly arranged. A lantern still held fuel, a blanket draped over a chair, a mug stained with old tea. Someone had worked here recently. His grandfather, or someone who had come after. He opened a journal. The writing was looser, frantic at times. One line struck him cold. "The device is part of a greater whole, and though dormant, it responds to signals I cannot explain." He turned pages faster, chest tightening. Photographs revealed more. Images of the metal structure glowing faintly, diagrams showing symbols paired with mathematical sequences he couldn't interpret. Official documents appeared in plastic sleeves, geological survey reports from the 1950s signed by his grandfather, government letters cutting their funding over irregularities, and drafts of furious replies never sent. His grandfather hadn't been a recluse by choice. He had been dismissed, ignored, pushed out. The obsession that had torn the family apart hadn't been madness, but desperation. The last journal entry, dated months before his grandfather's death, chilled him. "It is waking. The storms rise, the earth trembles. I cannot do this alone. If my grandson comes, may he choose a different path. The responsibility will be his." A deep rumble rolled beneath his feet. Buddy barked sharply, tail tucked. The metal walls began to shimmer faintly with shifting symbols. The compass in his pocket vibrated. Panic surged. He grabbed the journals, the compass pulsing bright, and sprinted toward the exit. The metal seam began closing. He dove through just in time. The house shook around him as he scrambled up the stairs, Buddy racing beside him. The hatch slammed, and he dragged a table over it, though he knew it wouldn't stop anything determined. The windows rattled. Dust drifted from ceiling beams. The wind outside rose into a howl that carried an unnatural pitch. Slowly, the trembling subsided. The house sighed back into uneasy stillness. He sank onto the couch, lungs heaving, sweat chilling on his skin. Buddy climbed into his lap, curling against him, trusting him without question. He stared at the fading daylight outside, the path leading back to town. His son was waiting, expecting his father to return by nightfall. He thought of the device beneath the house, the journals, the glowing symbols, the tremor in the earth. He couldn't walk away. He couldn't pretend none of it existed. He couldn't abandon what his grandfather had protected his entire life. For the first time, something asked him to stay, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he mattered to the outcome. He stroked Buddy's fur, steadying himself. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "Tomorrow we go back down there. But first—" His eyes lifted toward the window, toward the road back to town. "First we bring my boy home." The dog's tail thumped softly, and as the last light dimmed across the cliffs, he felt something unfurl inside him. Purpose, fragile but real. He wasn't running anymore. He was stepping into whatever waited below.